Florida State's high school quarterback recruiting board is changing by the moment. We've got a different quarterback that's going to be visiting that's committed to an SEC school, and another player that is rumored to be heading to an SEC school could actually end up at Florida State.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Florida State has some changing landscape, if you will, at the quarterback position on the recruiting board. Bowe Bentley, remember that name, he is no longer a possibility as he's eliminated Florida State, but Jaden O'Neal, Oklahoma commitment, is now going to be taking an official visit. 24/7 Noles and other sites are reporting it. You can check out all the details of the dates and everything there, but I'm going to give the backdrop on who he is, why this is happening, and how it is so intriguing for Florida State. First, Jaden is originally from California, and then he moved to Mustang, Oklahoma, where he resides now, because he thought he was going to OU. When I interviewed Jaden last summer, this is a young man that was dialed in. He visited numerous programs. He's a big kid, 6'4", 200 pounds, can really sling it, has some mobility. But when he was at Future 50 at IMG, he made it clear, again, he was going to Oklahoma. However, Oklahoma had a very poor season last year, changed coordinators, and now the new offensive coordinator, ironically, favors, yep, you guessed it, Bowe Bentley. He hasn't committed to OU, but he's down to LSU, OU, and Georgia. Most expect him to eventually join the Sooners. So, Jaden O'Neal's looked around. Florida State's one of the schools, Georgia's another, and among other schools that are coming and going during this spring window, we'll find out if he takes a bunch of visits or not, but he's going to visit Florida State in June. Pocket passer as a rule, but he can definitely move around some, and he's got the arm to throw the deep ball. I've seen him play multiple times. Great kid. He could fit in about anywhere, and he's the kind of young guy that I think would probably bolster your locker room. When you have a quarterback like that people gravitate towards, it's going to help your football team. That's probably one of the reasons that Gus Malzahn, Mike Norvell, and just honestly, the Florida State staff as a whole are interested. After you meet Jaden, it's pretty easy to see why people like him. Now, do I think he's going to Florida State? That story is not even close to being written. He's trying to figure this out. Is Oklahoma all the way out on him? Is he going to do anything else in terms of visits this spring? Is he just waiting on OBs? I'm not concerned about what he says. I need to see what happens because this is a very unusual circumstance. And I kind of feel for him because he's getting pushed out is what it looks like to me. And I understand Oklahoma changed coordinators. It's awkward, but it's a little late now for him. And he's kind of stuck. When he was out in California, now he's in Mustang, Oklahoma. We'll see how it plays out this fall for him, but he's at least in a football state and he'll have some fun. As for the other recruiting news on the quarterback front, Ole Miss has been really going after Landon Duckworth. That, to me, was the guy that I thought Florida State would end up with, and I thought he was probably as good a fit all around for what they were trying to do in this class. Very mobile. He's a kid that can throw it. I saw him at Elite 11 recently in Gainesville, Georgia. He did well. Another kid that's very well respected, very good with the media. Yes, sir, no, sir. He would fit in at Florida State just fine. But Lane Kiffin, who is a tremendous quarterback coach, has gotten in his ear, and I think it's pretty clear that Ole Miss is the leader. However, Ole Miss just took a quarterback commitment from Reese Wise, a kid out of none other than Austin Westlake, one of the famous programs in the state of Texas. Cade Klubnik, just for reference. At Clemson, yeah, that's the same high school. They've been to the state finals or at least the Final Four a ton of times. Klubnik won a state championship. They're a program that just finds a way to win. Very, very well coached. So Kiffin takes a quarterback from there. A little underrated, but a system guy in some ways, but he's got some mobility, RPO kind of guy. Does that mean they're done at quarterback? Probably not. So I'd send a text message to one of my buddies, and he says, no, Ole Miss is still after Duckworth. So this brings up the following question. Where does Florida State stand with him? How does that impact how they recruit Duckworth? Does it change his timeline? Again, I'm steadfast that Ole Miss prior to this is top of the board for Landon Duckworth. No doubt in my mind. Maybe Florida State has a better chance now. It's not like Florida State's depth chart is loaded here. You got Kevin Sperry, who is impressed in the spring. But, I mean, Brock Lynn's the only other scholarship guy behind Castellanos, who by my count is done after this year. You need at least one quarterback, if not two, to be honest, in this class. Florida State's depth chart is way better in terms of early playing time than Ole Miss. It's just not comparable. Ole Miss has an elite quarterback room because they also, this is bizarre, but Lane Kiffin beats to his own drum, have an FCS quarterback coming in, Trinidad Chambliss from Ferris State. They won the FCS championship last year. He accounted for 51 touchdowns. Is he going to redshirt as a backup? Because Austin Simmons is going to be the guy for Ole Miss. If he doesn't get hurt, I don't know if anybody else will really play. They might redshirt Chambliss or maybe not. I don't know. But we'll see what happens with Simmons. That is a unique room, and it's very deep. I just don't know if Duckworth wants to go there now. That is going to have to play out. But it just leaves so many options open for Florida State, or really anybody else for that matter, to get involved with Duckworth. Maybe this is a scenario that plays out for the long term, like late June we kind of find out, because once a quarterback commits, others tend to take spots because there are only so many. But again, I've been told Ole Miss is still going to take two. Is Duckworth going to be that guy? I don't know. But Florida State is still after him. And if he shows up to Florida State this next weekend for the final scrimmage, then you'll know, okay, he's still pretty serious about Florida State. That's an option. Auburn's also in the mix a little bit. We'll see what happens there. But again, Florida State quarterback recruiting is changing. That is 100%. And maybe somebody else gets involved. Again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think it's worth noting that taking a second quarterback in the class of 2026 is something they should have on the table. Not saying they should force it, because you can't just take a guy to take one. But maybe they get somebody and they bring in a second one that's a little bit different in stuff. Maybe Jaden and somebody that's more mobile. I don't know how long Gus is going to be there as part of that, but both Malzahn and Gus and Mike Norvell are probably going to have to sign off simultaneously on these guys. So I'm curious to see how Jaden O'Neal would be used if he comes here too. That's a whole other subject for another day. When we come back, I've got several questions, starting off with a quarterback question for Florida State fans as this roster is changing. The portal opened today. There's information about what they should be doing floating around from everybody. They've all got their opinions. They've all asked their questions. Well, I'm going to ask you, Florida State fans, what you would do. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. You can do it in a million different ways. You can obviously go ahead and bet on final scores, point spreads, halftime scores, etc. But don't forget about props. For a guy like me, who's a basketball guy, 3-point shots catch my attention. How many over or under a guy might make, or maybe go over or under because you think they're going to be hot from the 3-point line on how many points they score. Maybe it's assists or something else. But over unders on props are pretty cool. And don't forget, you can live bet on FanDuel. Don't miss out. Head over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Would you take two quarterbacks if you're Florida State in this class? Again, I'm going under the assumption that Thomas Castellanos will be done after this year. By my math, he only has 1 year left. I've had people argue with me on YouTube, but that's another deal. The least he's played in a season, I believe, is 5 games. But whatever the case may be, even if he came back, right now Florida State's depth chart has a true freshman with some promise, but it also has Brock Glenn, who we really still don't know a lot about, but he's in his 3rd year. He could even hit the portal. You don't know. Florida State is not in a great situation at the quarterback position. And it is, without a doubt, the most critical spot on the gridiron. So I ask again, would you take a second quarterback in the class of 26? It's just something to think about. I personally think it's worth evaluating because if you get somebody like Jaden O'Neal, who's, again, is more of a pocket guy, that doesn't mean you can't take somebody with a lot of upside that's a very, very good athlete that maybe needs a little more time and he might catch up later. That's possible. Jaden O'Neal is a little more polished. He's certainly been trained a lot, and he's a very talented quarterback, but he's not as mobile. Just something to think about. Now on to questions overall. It's got to have a lot of portal thoughts, some thoughts about the current roster, what they need for this season. This is a little bit of everything because Florida State football has so much going on. Number one, would you save the money and write it out for 25 and invest in the high school recruiting and winter transfer portal? Or would you really try to spend cash right now because you think you got to win this fall? Again, part of that factor, at least for me, University of Alabama is going to Doak Campbell Stadium first game. You cannot afford, in my opinion, to get smacked in that game. Now, you don't have to win that game, but you got to be really competitive. If the Florida State coaches think that they're in a spot where they're really short at any position, and their account is better than anybody's, we can speculate, but there's only so much we can know. I think they'll spend. They're going to have to get the money from whatever organization or organizations that come in. I've lost track of how many organizations are involved with Florida State and other schools. Plus, you got the House settlement. But overall, they got to find a way to get a few more guys. There are rumors about some players leaving, possibly defense backs, etc. We'll see what happens. But until that happens officially, I'm going to wait. But Florida State has to approach it from a perspective of if you're going to be active, you're already active. Guys you're going to hit in the portal, guys you're going to communicate with. That's how this works. Maybe the fit isn't there, but I'm guessing Florida State's going to be more active than what some people expect. And I also think that Florida State will not wait. I don't think they're going to wait till the winter portal. I think they're going to try to win this year. But if you disagree with me, comment on YouTube. I'd love to hear your thoughts. There are some rumors Florida State will lose a few players to the portal. Positions that, Florida State can at least afford to be hit would be what? Offensive line's obvious. Take that off the board. If you say offensive line, congratulations. That's the easy one. Let's exclude that from the conversation. Where else besides offensive line can Florida State not afford to lose anybody else? Everybody's got their opinion. At one point, I thought DB was the safest spot, but like 24/7 Knowles, they're talking about that may not be the case. Again, there might be guys leaving. There's been a lot of injuries. That gives you pause. So maybe they do take at least one. There are a few guys in the portal from the state of Florida. They're DBs. That's possible, but you got to look far and wide. So again, if you want, comment on the YouTube page. What position, if you're really going to hit something in the portal, would you go after if you're a Florida State coaching staff member? Stance on the quarterbacks. Would you take one on the portal, even if it's just to be a backup to Tommy and somebody that's developmental? This is like recruiting. If you don't take two quarterbacks in this class, another way to attack the situation on the roster is maybe you groom somebody. Don't know who it is, but the way this business works, whether it's high school, junior college, or portal, relationships. Somebody Gus knows, somebody Norvell knows, somebody one of the guys on the staff trusts as a trainer. Give you an example, Coach L up in Birmingham. If you recruit the Birmingham area, you know Coach L. If he signs off on a kid, doesn't matter what position, chances are that kid's stock goes up. There's a trainer in every city. It's kind of like that. Coach D-Rob in Dallas, great receiver trainer. If you're looking for a receiver in that area, he probably knows about somebody, even if he's not training. You got to find the quarterback in whatever city, in whatever area that might be coming out because he didn't start somewhere. He had to wait too long. Can Florida State get one of those and then get a high school kid? Absolutely. But is that the path you would pick as a Florida State fan? Once again, let me know what your thoughts are on the YouTube page for Locked On Seminoles. Here's one that is interesting. In case you missed it, former elite high school recruit and almost Florida State Seminole, Zaquan Patterson is leaving Miami after 1 year. He played on the same high school team as Jeremiah Smith down at Chaminade Madonna in Broward County. Great kid, great player, but it didn't work out at Miami. Would you go after him? And if you did, would you make him a priority over other guys? Because here's the key. I've been saying this for a while. I've learned this the hard way through Florida State. High school production and college production are not one and the same, obviously. A lot of elite guys go to college, and for whatever reason, they just can't handle it. Now, he only was there for 1 year, and Zaquan's got all kinds of physical ability, I can assure you, but he did really produce last year for the Canes. Would you take him at Florida State? There are rumors that they're at least talking to his camp. I don't know what's going on. I haven't talked to Zaquan. But would you go after a guy that was an elite safety and probably could play multiple spots? He could probably play running back if you wanted him to. He's a big, strong kid, around 200 pounds. But strong safety, maybe some nickel, play him as a dime linebacker or something like that. There's a lot of different roles that Patterson could roll with. I don't know. I think Florida State should at least look at him and figure it out. Part of that's NIL and whatnot. But it's intriguing that a former Miami player could end up at Florida State. All right, next. What do you want to hear from Norvell after spring to make you feel Florida State is heading in the right direction after 2-10 last year? This is open-ended. You could even frame this from a recruiting perspective because he'll probably be asked questions about recruiting in the transfer portal too. If he does a post-spring press conference, and I assume he will. For me, I want to hear guys are getting healthy. That's first thing, because it's been nerve-wracking how many guys have been banged up for Florida State this spring. Just want to throw that out there. But the other thing that I want to hear is they have some continuity at the receiver position. There's only a few practices left, and they have just been decimated with guys going in and out of the lineup. They need some headway there. If he can't give a definitive answer on that, guys are just playing better, this guy's helped a little bit, this and that, I'll be nervous. That's me. What do you say? What do you want to hear Norvell talk about at the conclusion of spring? Next, your biggest 2025 concern. That could be a player, that could be a coach, that could be depth, that could be the schedule. Open-ended again. What is your biggest concern for the Florida State Seminoles in 2025? Next, what odds do you give Florida State to beat the University of Alabama game 1? 10%? 25? 8? 70? Whatever it is. Why is the other part of that? Not just because you're a Florida State fan, especially if you're a homer. Every fan base has got those. Why can Florida State win that game? A little backdrop. I watched some of Alabama's spring game. Ty Simpson's going to be the quarterback. That's pretty obvious. He was highly rated, but he's not a dude. He's a pretty good quarterback, and I think he kind of fits what Kalen DeBoer wants. He's probably a little more pocket presence kind of guy, like understand reads, post-snap reads in particular, but pre-snap being comfortable with what the kid's doing, give him a little more of a control of the offense than he might somebody else. I can see that. But I don't think he's scary. Is Alabama's defense going to be good? Yeah, they will be. But are they going to be electric? I don't know about that. We'll see. So again, what percent do you give Florida State's chances to beat Alabama game 1? Next, does Florida State win at least one of the games between Bama, Miami, Clemson, or Florida? If yes, which one and why? Number 9, Florida State player you expect to break out. Now, again, this is pretty open-ended. You can look at this from many different perspectives. Breakout means whatever it is to you. But for me, that means he's a guy that was either a backup or didn't even play on Florida State's roster last year, and then he really comes to the forefront, or he played a little bit. Maybe he was banged up and had to go out, or he was just overshadowed because they had a really good guy at his spot. For me, it's Jalen Lucas, but that's an easy one. He's been talked about a lot this spring. If I went with a second guy, that's a little harder. I'd probably still go with Quindarius Jones. I like him better than most. I know he's been up and down at parts of spring, but they changed the defense. Over the summer, a lot of the DBs, because they're going to use more zone, there could be a changing of the guard there. And I could be way off on Quindarius because he's good in man coverage. Maybe he's not good in zone. If he's not, then my prediction is wrong there because they're definitely going to play more zone. Having said that, There are a lot of options. Who you got? When we come back, we're going to finish up on the list here at Locked On Seminoles and a parting shot for me as well. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. All right, to finish up the list here, will Darrell Jackson show major improvement at defensive tackle / nose guard? I think he'll play both spots. Tony White has been gushing about him. There's been discussion about Darrell Jackson being a leader. There's been discussion about Darrell Jackson chasing down players from behind in practice, like receivers and stuff. 330-pound to 350-pound men don't do that. Isn't it ironic that the guy that I've harped on numerous times because he has so much talent, but he had so many loafs, that's a stat that you don't ever want to be associated with, or you didn't give max effort, especially in that North Carolina and that Notre Dame game. Both of those were terrible. Is all of a sudden the guy that's the beacon of light? Hopefully that's partially because of the new staff, maybe getting rid of some old players that didn't help him much. I don't know what it is, but I like it. There's nothing worse than covering players that don't want to be there. As media members, you're looked at as a bad guy if you call them out, but I'm looked at as a bad guy if I don't do my job. So I hate it when players don't give max effort. It's not a good spot to be in. It is what it is. But that being the case, it really sounds like Darrell Jackson has turned the corner. So I ask again, will Darrell Jackson show in games, of course, that's something that matters, show major improvement in 2025? If you think yes, explain why. If you think no, also give us your take. As for my final take, it is this. The final few days of Florida State spring practice is very important. We need to find out more regarding injuries. Like, it's just gotten to the point it's ridiculous. It just seems to run at spots too. Like, it's almost like somebody's after Florida State football. Receiver, O-line, even the DB room, which was at one point one of the deepest rooms on the team. It's been banged up a lot, especially safety. Need to hear definitive news from Norvell when he gives his press conference at the end about injuries. Secondarily, need to hear something positive in regards to the offense, hopefully specifically to receiver, but something more than, the guys are working hard, this and that. He just kind of goes around stuff sometimes. I need to hear definitive in terms of like depth chart stuff, and I know he hates it, but if he doesn't, that's not a good sign. He has to be absolutely point blank about guys having a chance to be starters in the probable pecking order. If he doesn't, I will not feel comfortable. And if he's not going to do that, then I'm going to hammer him for it. I don't care if people get mad. This is Florida State. If you are scared of giving out any form of a depth chart and you're at Florida State, you're not the right guy. I'm sorry. I don't care if it's the portal era or not. Do we have a number 2 receiver? Is just one great example. Do you have any idea of what the pecking order is? And fill in the blank here, but running back, etc. It looks like there's some answers. Brodell, Juan, Jalen Lucas. Those are pretty easy. But is there any other roles? There's a lot of ways he could do this. This is a pet peeve of mine. Norvell has kind of fallen into that this spring. He's not near as bad as some of the other coaches in college football. Lord forbid if he ever went down the Jim Harbaugh path. But this is a pet peeve of mine, and I will not come off of it. Need some form of a depth chart. If he doesn't give it, I will not be very friendly about it. That is all today for Locked On Seminoles, and I appreciate you all stopping in to talk all kinds of things with me with Noles, recruiting, the roster, what's coming up on the transfer portal. We got a little bit of everything. Also talking a lot of portal stuff right now on Locked On the Portal. That's my other podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's booming because today's the first day the portal officially being open. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you do. It's a lot of fun for me, and there's going to be plenty of guys that are going to be entertaining Florida State or leaving Florida State that are on that podcast as well. Thank you once again. We will see you all again tomorrow.